Okay, folks, we're going to begin. Wait a sec, we need one more. Pam, you're not a member, right? You're a guest? Are you a member? Yes, so I need... Yeah, we just need to get... Correct, Katie? One more, and we've got...
Yeah, she's here. She's just in the bathroom.
I don't like what I'm hearing.
What is that exactly?
No, I don't know.
So I'll just say before we become official, folks, that Sam is spending his last full day as deputy mayor fighting a cold. Councillor Cuddle has got an issue, and Paul is on his health journey, for which we wish him the best, and which he's working hard, and will not be here today, and hopefully we'll be here for most of tomorrow. All right, let's begin. Call the meeting to order. I want to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki. Mi'kma'ki is the traditional, the unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq people. We honor the peace and friendship treaties signed between the Mi'kmaq and the Crown going back to the 1720s, and we also acknowledge the long and important contribution of African Nova Scotians to this province as well. We have a bare quorum today. People will have an opportunity to express opinions there too if things go through from here. Does somebody want to consider approval of the minutes of October 2-3? Moved by Councillor Mason, seconded by Councillor Daigle-Gammon. All those in favour? Opposed? That is carried. The approval of the order of business. We have an order in front of us. Madam Clerk, any changes?
No changes from the clerk's office.
Councillor Mason? Moved. Councillor Daigle-Gammon seconded. All in favour? That's our order. Business arising calls for declaration of conflict of interest. We have no motions of reconsideration or rescission. We do have a piece of business which is deferred, and that is bylaw C-1100, the campaign finance bylaw. Is this on the floor from the last meeting? I'm trying to recall. We don't need to redo the motion. We can just pick up the debate. Is that correct, or do we need to redo the motion?
I think it's a new motion, isn't it?
So, Mayor Savage, you, the rest of the committee, there is a motion on the floor. One of the recommended motions in here is actually an amending motion to the motion that is on the floor.
Okay. Council, what is your wish? Councillor Mason.
Help me with this there, Katie. Which one am I reading? Am I reading what's on the agenda in total? Well, I have to move the amendments though, right? So I move that Executive Standing Committee amend item 1 of September 25th, 2023 executive, oh, you're doing things. There you go. Executive Standing Committee motion item number 1314, moved by Councillor Mason, seconded by Deputy Mayor Austin, to replace the reference to attachment 2 of the staff report dated September 19th, 2023 with attachment 2.1 revised of the staff report dated November 21, 2023. So it reads that the Executive Standing Committee recommend to Halifax Regional Council 1, adoption of bylaw C-1102, amending bylaw C-1100, the campaign finance bylaw as set out in attachment 2.1 revised of the staff report dated November 21, 2023, and 2, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to conduct a review of campaign finance bylaw that considers inflation for the amount of campaign contribution and the maximum spending. I think there's a little more, Katie. There you go. Limits and the review be completed prior to January 1 of an election year. So moved.
Seconded. Councillor Hensby. Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Really, thank you, staff, for getting back so quickly with the answers to the questions that were raised by the committee. Personally, I accept the proposals. I think that given the differences between how municipalities do elections, that the limits that are proposed are fine, and that the amendments around spouse to treat them as the same as any other person who's contributing money to a campaign is appropriate. I will note, just for the record, Katie, the way I read it, there are reports in there twice in one of the report, staff report, so I only read, so just delete the additional report there. I didn't read that, just for crystal clarity. But yeah, no, satisfied with that, and I think that we can pass it and move on to the next item. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have an issue with it, if I'm reading it correctly. This recommendation doesn't change what somebody can contribute to their own campaign. According to what I'm reading, they could contribute up to $17,700 toward their own campaign, correct, Liam? I can't think of a word other than gross to describe that. And under the change now, their spouse could also contribute?
No, the spouse is considered an independent donor, I guess, for way of phrasing it. They would be considered with the same campaign contribution limits as any other person.
But that means they could contribute beyond the $17,700 that their spouse can contribute.
That is correct.
So that is disgusting to me. Federally, you can contribute up to $5,000 to your own campaign. In my riding in Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, the spending limit is $109,000. That means the most you can contribute to your own campaign is less than 5% of the total cost. Here, we are allowing an individual to single-handedly, because they happen to be wealthy enough, to finance half of their campaign, and their spouse and assumedly their children could contribute even more. There's two purposes to campaign finance. One is transparency and accountability, so that people know who's contributing to the political process. The other, in my view, is to try to develop some kind of equity. And what we're doing is saying it's okay for somebody with money to start with a built-in advantage over everybody else. I just don't get that. I thought we had looked at changing that to think to 5,000. Your survey of councillors obviously came back and said they didn't see a problem with the current situation. I do. I can't imagine any other situation, you know, in most democratically, I mean, in the U.S., they have limits, but then you've got all this soft money that people go out and get. But the whole point of campaign finance is to try to eliminate that. And I just think it's obscene that somebody can, with money, can single-handedly finance half of what they're allowed to and more than most people spend. So I can't support that, but it'll go to council, and we can have the debate there. And if maybe somebody will convince me that it's okay for rich people to have an advantage in an election. I don't know if there's any comments or.
Mayor Savage, through you to the committee, just wanted to talk about how we got to that number. That number.
The councillors, obviously, when they were discussed, said they didn't see a need to change it.
And that is exactly it. And it is the number from the existing campaign finance bylaw that was passed in 2018, I believe. So I just wanted to let you know that that was where that number came from.
I know that, and that's why I wanted it changed.
And your synopsis was correct. Based on the interviews and what was completed, there was nothing that came from council to give a number to reduce it to, but the number could be adjusted or amended in the bylaw, and we can do that here, or we can do it through the council process.
Well, I'll see where the debate goes, but I would certainly support an amendment to that. I just don't understand why we would say that it is either moral or, in this case, legal to have a built-in advantage for people with money in a campaign. I just don't like it. Doesn't make sense to me. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do think that it's important for us to recognize that political parties are also available to support candidates. And so when we talk about, federal or provincial campaigns in comparison to municipal campaigns, it's important to understand that all of those volunteers that come with a party machine are available to those candidates that are aligned with those parties. That advantage certainly isn't excluded in this. So while we say that $17,700 seems like an awful lot, for those who are independent of political parties, it's actually not much money at all. They don't receive the machine, for the volunteer machine, the donor machine, any of the benefits that come from a political party. So it's important to understand that independent candidates don't have the benefit of political parties. Thank you.
Right, that's my point, that they shouldn't have the advantage of having money. In my view, they just shouldn't. And the fact that they're independent and don't get tax receipts and things like that make it harder to raise money, and a bigger advantage for an individual with money than they would have in another system where there are tax receipts. Councillor Hensby.
Well, Mr. Mayor, the other side of the coin is, what about the persons that are well-connected, that has a lot of support, or I should say, connections to access dollars? Some people may not have the social connections or networks to raise money, so they may have to pay for themselves. So it's a two-sided coin when it comes to campaign financings. Those who have the money or those who can get the money. You know, those are two different sides of the equation here. So I think that, you know, most of my campaigns, I finance most of my campaigns. I do accept some donations, but the majority has always been self-funded. And you know, the cost of a campaign nowadays, printing and postage are the most expensive parts. You know, if you want to mail out one brochure to every doorstep, that's a couple grand in itself, easily. That's the printing cost, and another couple grand just for the postage. So I think these campaign finances should be also look at the campaign expenses as well, so make sure there's a correlation between the two. Thank you.
Well, there are spending limits in the legislation. Councillor Mason?
So I'm non-aligned, and I raised the most money of anybody in my first campaign and then in my second campaign who ran for council. I raised 22%, I think, of my first election was from donations $25 and under. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm quite confident that, and I hear what you're saying, David. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Lovelace, but I know you can raise money because I've done it. And to you, Councillor Hensby, but you also have to get the votes to win, right? Like you have to be able to have a network where you can raise money, and sometimes it's $5 at a time. I had a lot of $5 donations my first election. So, you know, making a donation isn't beyond people, but ultimately you have to connect that money with actually getting votes. And so, I guess I'll just look at you, Mr. Mayor. I'm comfortable making an amendment here and asking staff to come back with an amendment or a supplementary report. Oh, so after this is passed, I could make an amendment to do that. And we can test it here, or we can wait till we get to council as a whole, because I suspect, yeah, you know what, maybe we should wait till we get to council as a whole. I suspect that while some folks might like to have that option, that it'll be harder to defend that publicly, because I think the public is going to look at that and have the same concerns that you've expressed. So, yeah, with that, I guess we can close this debate after Councillor Lovelace contributes, and I guess the question is, where do you want to do it there, Mr. Mayor? Do you want to do it here or at council?
Well, I'll go along with whatever the committee wants to do. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question about the third-party advertising. As we're chatting here, I think it's important to realize that when political parties, for example, get engaged and involved in and provide their volunteers and their fundraising resources and so on and so forth to elect their candidates, it certainly does have an advantage over those independent candidates that don't align with those political parties. That being said, it appears to me that in these amendments, it is still possible to have third-party advertisement as an in-kind contribution. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to how we look at this, because one of my concerns when I put this motion forward in the first place in April of this year, my concern was trying to limit foreign actors from contributing to a Halifax municipal campaign, but in addition to that, ensuring that we had effective restrictions in place to limit third-party advertising that potentially could, advertise against a candidate or for a candidate. Can you speak to that, please?
Councillor Lovelace, Mayor Savage to the councillor. In the initial report that came back in September, the third-party advertising was addressed. So unlike Elections Nova Scotia, the Municipal Elections Act does not regulate third-party advertising, and the MEA only regulates contributions made to a candidate or an association that was created to support a candidate.
Okay.
So any restrictions on third-party advertising will require legislative amendment at the provincial level.
Okay, so we don't control that at this point, so it would mean that council would have to actually request changes to the Municipal Elections Act and look at the province actually modernizing their policies. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a question, guys. So if this passes what's on the floor, this is an amendment, correct? So if this amendment passes, we're then voting on the main motion, or we're sending it back?
So if the amendment passes, it will remove the word spouse from the campaign finance bylaw, and then it would be then moving, if committee directed, it would move forward to council for consideration. We are asking that this move forward to council. We do need to get these rules and restrictions in place soon. We do want to get the candidate information handbooks out as soon as possible.
We would be back voting on the main motion after this.
Right, because part of it does say that the review has to be completed prior to January 1 of an election year. Next year is an election year.
That reference is relating to the incorporation of the inflation principles on the campaign finance bylaw that has been incorporated in this bylaw.
Right, so, because we're talking about, this 17,700, for example. That's in the main motion.
Yes, sorry, I may be confused at the question. The review in the motion is relating to the inflation principles that were being applied to the campaign finance bylaw that are in the proposed bylaw to you, not regarding the self-funded limits.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make one other point. Councillor Hensby's point was that there are people who don't have money, but then there are people who have access to people who have money. The people who have money have the best access to the people who have money as well. That's the inherent unfairness of this whole, what we're going through. I just can't see how we could possibly say that it's okay. I mean, how many people spend over $17,700 to run for council? Not very many. The limit may be 33, but some did. Not many did. And so what we're saying is, just so we all are clear when it comes to council, we don't mind that rich people have a leg up. That's what we're saying. And I just don't think that's right. All right, ready for the motion? The question on the amendment has been called. What's that? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, so the amendment is passed. So now what are we at? The main motion? Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that the committee amend Section 2.3 of the proposed bylaw to read, the combined total amount of a candidate may contribute to their own campaign shall not exceed $5,900 per election. Katie, I sent that to you so you can put it on the screen. Moved.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon? Discussion on that? Councillor Lovelace?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to raise the point that traditional candidates have a difficult time raising money, as we've seen with women in particular, folks who are racialized, folks from the disability community, individuals who are not typically a white man, or known as a traditional politician. And so with that in mind, some individuals, in order to become elected, they're not receiving donations because they do not look like a typical candidate or a typical politician. In that case, what we're doing here is removing more of their ability to actually fund their campaign because they're not able to get those votes due to systemic racism, for example, misogyny, sexism, ableism, and so on and so forth. So I do just, while I don't have a vote, I do want to put that on the table. I think it does a disservice to those individuals who are not identified as a typical politician. Thank you.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seconded this amendment because I also agree that we don't want to incentivize those persons who have a financial ability over those that don't. Excuse me. And I guess I'm not a typical politician either, and having a limit will probably make it a little bit more challenging. But I do believe that this is a conversation that the entire regional council does need to have. And so moving this forward to regional council, I think, is a good way to have everybody's voice heard. It is, think about rural districts, you know, to my colleague here one time, I had said, I wish we didn't do signs. Signs in a rural district as big as ours are very, very expensive. So trying to figure out, you know, how are we going to raise enough money to get enough signs? But, you know, the environmental person in me is saying it would be great if we got rid of signs anyway, and then we could reduce the expense of campaigning. But all of these, I think, are conversations that regional council needs to have and thoroughly have a good discussion with. I do really think that if you have money, well, I don't know. Some of the people I know that have money don't want to be a politician. That's why they have money, because they're not politicians. But anyway, bringing it to regional council, I think, is the best thing. Thank you.
Okay. And I would just say, the reason I'm against this is because people who are racialized, who are minority, who are disabled, are the least likely to be able to self-finance a campaign. That's why that's an issue, is the issue of fairness, because they don't have the money. If you look at large campaigns, and whether it be in the States with the Michael Bloombergs and the Steve Forbes, or in Canada, it's white men who are able to self-finance campaigns and get around all kinds of election laws. This is about fairness to me, and that's why I will support. And it still allows somebody to put $6,000 plus their spouse, if they have them, and their children who would also have access to money. They could still significantly, basically self-finance their campaign more than I would like. I think we should all be subject to the same limits, but I think this is better than what I had seen, and we'll let council have the say when it comes back to council. On the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. On the main motion now? You ready for the question on the main motion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Notices of tabled matters, none. Correspondence, Madam Clerk.
No correspondence received from the clerk's office.
Petitions,
No petitions as well.
no presentations. Public participation. Is there anybody here that would like to speak at this meeting? Is there anybody here who would like to speak at this meeting? Is there anybody else who would like to come forward? Seeing none, information items brought forward, none. Reports from staff, 1311, Halifax Regional Municipality and CSAP regular election, appointment of returning officer, delegation of authorities, and use of provincial list of electors. Councillor Mason.
So with great reluctance, just kidding, Ian, I move that Executive Standing Committee recommend Halifax Regional Council appoint Ian McLean as the returning officer to conduct all regular and special elections required under the Municipal Elections Act, including both municipal and CSAP elections. 2, for the 2024 Halifax municipal and CSAP elections in accordance with the Municipal Elections Act, delegate the following authorities: to the clerk, the authority to appoint one or more assistant returning officers; to the clerk, B, to the clerk, the authority to make, revise, and amend the tariff of fees and expenses; and C, to the returning officer, the authority to set the advanced polling date; and 3, direct that the provincial list of electors to use in conducting the 2024 Halifax Regional, Municipal, and CSAP elections.
Second, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Councillor Mason.
Itchy trigger in there. So great. I will say, I've said it before, and I will continue to say it, the less involved we are, this is continuing the model of what we did with the redistricting and having a professional staff and an arm's length committee making recommendations that we did not try and gerrymander and put our fingers into. So yes, I think delegating this authority makes sense, and I support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Hensby.
Just out of curiosity, since the last election, there's been a considerable amount of growth in different places, and so I think enumeration is going to be probably required in some of the places like Bedford West and places like that that has significant growth, that probably new subdivisions and new areas have been developed ever since the provincial election just a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So kind of curious of how you're going to determine which area is going to be enumerated. And also, I've always asked a question about the amount of polls. I've always felt that election is election, be it provincial, municipal, or federal, they should have the same amount of polling districts or polling areas. I've seen that in the municipality, we've been cutting back on the amount of polling locations we have because we have the online voting capacity, but in rural Halifax, we don't have the online capacity for sometimes telephone votes or the online voting technology, and some of our population base still prefer the paper ballot going out to the polling station. So I wasn't sure in regards to, as this moves forward, when do you anticipate a plan or a date to have the amount of polls determined for particular areas?
Mayor Sabat, through to the councillor. Thank you for the question. That's one of the things that we are actively working on as we speak. We have recently entered into a contract for the e-voting contract for the upcoming election that will help determine the amount of polling stations and the technology that'll be used for voting in the election. As we progress down this contract, we'll have updates and provide further for the public, but also for members of council, to make sure that people are aware not only of what the plan is for voting, but have a comfort level with the voting process. We're very new in this contract, so I do need a little bit of time to be able to work with our IT colleagues to provide some of that information and get back to you, but we will get back to you when it comes to the form and format for voting. That will affect the voting stations as well. We are aware of those issues that you've discussed and put forward, and they are being built into our election project management to ensure we have internet connectivity addressed as much as possible to the best of our abilities, but also other manners for voting for those areas that do not have the internet connectivity that we can rely on the internet voting the way we can in some of the more higher level internet connectivity in the municipality. As far as enumeration, I've been very impressed with our work and the relationship with Elections Nova Scotia and the amount of advancement that they have been working on when it comes to their voters lists and the changes that have occurred as far as their processes that this motion will allow us to then tap into and work with them on to determine if we do have to do any formal enumeration or if their process improvements will allow us to move forward with their voters list with the appropriate cleanup that we have to do for every single election. I can commit to, if we do need to do or move forward with looking at a formal enumeration, coming back to this group to give an update.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. I'm not sure how the databases are compiled, but just a civic addressing test, regards to having our civic address database come as these are now the current addresses we have on file that have been provided with occupancy permits and everything. I would assume be the test, and compare that against the voters list as how many addresses don't match up. So.
And Mayor Savage, through to the councillor, one of the benefits we do have is in 2022, we went through the district boundary review process, which required very granular level data refinement and review for us to do the voters, the eligible voters in the districts. So this is something that has been worked on throughout the last 4 years. And as I said, if we do feel there is any formal enumeration that needs to occur, we will need to go back to this group.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, ready for the question? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Proposed meeting schedule for 2024, not that far away. Councillor Hensby.
Executive Standing Committee approve the proposed 2024 Executive Standing Committee meeting schedules as outlined in the staff memorandum.
Second, Councillor Mason. Any discussion on it? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 13.2.1, this is coming from Women's Advisory. It's the Candidate Contribution Rebate Program. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I should put this down. Motion that the Executive Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to provide a staff report exploring the creation of a rebate program for municipal campaign contributions during regular or special elections held in the Halifax Regional Municipality. The report should include an overview of the legislative and budgetary framework required to enable the proposed program.
Second, Councillor Mason. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a motion from the Women's Advisory Committee that was put forward by Councillor Lovelace. and I know that it's a request for a staff report, but I'm a little bit concerned around the legality. They're talking about tax receipts, the complexity that it would add to any campaign. I've been very fortunate to have people on my campaign team who are seasoned and knew what to do and how this stuff all worked. But to add this level of complexity seems rather onerous. And so I'm just wondering from Ian's perspective, some initial thoughts on what this might entail.
Mayor Savage, to the councillor, I think, as with anything with the campaign financing, this is a complicated conversation. The only jurisdiction that I am aware of that does municipal rebate programs for municipal campaign donations is in Ontario. And the City of Toronto has a program where the municipality funds the campaign contributions through the tax rate. So there is a program where contributions go into the councillors. There's a formal process of receipting, but the actual receipts are provided by the municipality, and it is a tax-funded program. From my understanding, this would require legislative change for us to be able to do this and for it to be empowered. So as far as the motion in front of you today, I have not done the research into the legislative requirements that would need to happen in Nova Scotia, and our legal team hasn't started that process yet. But that is the example that I can point to in Canada that does a rebate program.
Thank you. We'll look forward to the conversation here.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I guess my question would be, because we debated this when we brought in campaign finance reform, and I know only one city does this, and I know it would be a straight tax cost, which would add to the potential tax increase we're talking about. We already, as a council, admittedly, before the last election, voted not to pursue this, and that report already exists. So I guess I'm looking at the clerk and the CAO saying, does this require, the way it's written arguably could, because it says an overview of legislative and budgetary framework required to enable the proposed program. Like, this could be a 3-page report that says, here's that information and here's what we already gave you in 2017 or whenever it was. Because I suspect, while I have some sympathy, and it would be great if it came out of the income tax, it's not going to. The province will not do that. It will never happen. They've expressed no interest in that when we've asked them. And it will be a tax-funded program, and then council will say no. So I think there are other ways to put in targeted investments to help empower and bring people from traditionally underrepresented groups, women, visible minorities, BIPOC communities. That would be better than a tax receipt or a rebate. The rebate is going to benefit people who have a lot of money to donate already. So that was another big feature of why we said no. So anyway, any comments from, can we, is this an extensive report, or can we recycle what we already have, or?
Mayor Savage, through to the councillor, the only real thing I could add to that is I do not believe there has been any legislative changes that have occurred since that previous report that would have affected this. So effectively, the rules and regulations should be similar. We do not have the most updated, we do not have the new Municipal Election Act as of yet. We are anticipating to receive that soon, but I have not heard anything that this would be considered in that.
I guess the other issue is there's no way this is going to be done in time for this election, right? I mean, we just to handle, I mean, we're going to be in campaign financing March 1st. So just to manage people's expectations in the public, even if council decided to fund this, it would be either in the middle of a campaign or next election.
Mayor Savage, through to the councillor, we're 10 months away from the election, so implementing any new programs will be very complicated to do to make it for the 2024 municipal election.
Well, and the solicitor just whispered in my ear that we won't get the statutory changes in time, and I want to remind the public, the media, and the councillors here that we are not allowed right now statutorily to give money to individuals and businesses. So it's not possible to do this without the province changing the law, which wouldn't happen until at the earliest the spring session, but probably wouldn't happen. So, all right, thank you very much. I'll support it, because I feel like we need a report to show the Women's Committee this is why this is unable to happen at this time, rather than, assuming that's the report we get back, it sounds like we will, rather than just say no. I think that would be, a bad look. So I'll support it for a staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I always felt there should be campaign reform at municipal levels for years. I've always stated in the past that donations should be channeled through the clerk's office. Any campaign donation given to a candidate should be written through the municipality as a gift to the crown. Therefore, if I got a $100 donation directed to me, the municipality keep 20% as administrative charge, the $80 goes to me in my campaign. That 20% helps fund elections as well. It could also be used for rebate programs and stuff as well. So I think that there's a way that this could be done, but we need the legislative amendments to empower us to do so. And that, as stated, we won't see that done before the spring session is concluded. So therefore, it would be no way in time for a municipal election 10 months away. But I think there are creative ways we can look at this, because you can get a tax receipt by writing a check to the municipality as a gift to the crown. So that's one way of getting around it. That way, the candidate doesn't get all the money. So that way, it kind of limits the campaign contribution the candidate gets, but it helps fund the campaign overall for others. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going to say something? No. Councillor Daigle-Gammon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll support this as well, because try again. I don't like asking for a staff report and then it sits and it waits and all of that kind of stuff and use up people's time when we kind of know the answers. But the fact that the Women's Advisory Committee has made this request and that there is current information on file, hopefully the report can be turned around more quickly, and then the Women's Advisory Committee could have that information to figure out how they would like to see it move forward and understand what the changes are required legislatively. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak to it too. So I'll support the request from the Women's Advisory Committee. Appreciate, in fact, their interest in this. And you know, it's Councillor Hensby's right. If we did do something like this, then it wouldn't be the way we do it now, where at the end of the campaign we write the list of who gave us money, we submit it. It would have to go through the clerk's office, and I think there would have to be some kind of an administrative fee to help pay for the program. You know, I can't tell you how often somebody's come to me after one of my elections and said, listen, I never got my receipt for my donation. And I know that my you know, fundraisers are pretty good at explaining they don't exist. But people just assume that we have it because they do give provincial and federal donations, and the tax credits are very generous. Way more generous than Dask Industry would get if you gave Dask Industry $1,000. It's right off your taxes. It's not part of, you know, calculated deductions and then a percentage. So it's worth having another look. I'll certainly support it and see where it goes. There would have to be a lot more rigor to it than exists now, and that would come back in the report. Ready for the question? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. And I thank the Women's Advisory Committee for the work on this. The African Descent Advisory Committee, African Nova Scotia representative in the Halifax Regional Police, Councillor Mason.
I move that the Executive Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to request a staff report on 1, the representation of people of African Nova Scotian descent in the Halifax Regional Police Force, 2, the status of the All-African Descent Cadet Class in 1993, 3, an understanding of education provided all officers around systemic racism in all matters, and 4, that the report be provided to the African Nova Scotian Descent Advisory Committee for review and possible recommendation. I so move.
Second by Councillor Hensby. Just before I go back to you, let me hear from the CAO on this. Councillor Mason, I'll give you time.
Thank you. Through the mayor to the committee, one of the questions that I had over the weekend when I was reading this report was the governance role of the Executive Standing Committee versus the Board of Police Commissioners as the receiving body of the recommendations that would come from the African Nova Scotian Descent Advisory Committee. So the African Nova Scotian Descent Advisory Committee is a very important new committee that we've got set up, but we haven't had reports coming through yet where we've had to figure out what this process would look like. So this would be one that, you know, Halifax Regional Police and Human Resources would work together to prepare the information report to the African Nova Scotian Descent Advisory Committee. But if they have recommendations coming out of that report, my question perhaps to the solicitor is, do they go to the Executive Standing Committee and then go to the Board of Police Commissioners via referral? Or would it go as recommendation or feedback to the Board of Police Commissioners directly for their consideration?
I'm not sure that there's a clear answer to that off the top of my head, Madam CAO. It's with respect to the request in number 4 in terms of going back to, it's a question of who's on first on this specific topic. I would suggest refer this to the Board of Police and that they seek input from the African Nova Scotia Descent Advisory Committee on it. Probably makes as much sense as any of it.
Councillor Mason.
So it's interesting. So I have a notice of motion coming up at the end of this, talking about broadening the committee's role and oversight on community safety, fire and emergency, and the human resources, which are the other pieces. And I'm feeling like now like I should really quickly write in and also, you know, have some oversight on the relationship of the police bylaw and police and the relationship of the Board of Police Commissioners, right? Because we're trying to, you know, so is the Board of Police Commissioners functioning effectively as a hybrid between a standalone and a standing committee, like an arm's length board and a standing committee? Is that where we want to send everything? Or when it comes to something like the human resource function, which is very much supported by HRM, which is our director that reports to you, that for HRP, is that something that this committee, which does have responsibility for human resources, would that be something that we have oversee? So I feel like there definitely needs to be a second motion at some point, not today, clarifying that, right? Like figuring that out. Maybe it's already clear in the minds of the lawyer, he wants to get back on the thing. But if referral to Board of Police Commissioners is the recommendation from staff, I'm okay with that too.
Mr. Mayor, through to the councillor, so you raise a really interesting point, because when you start to look at the broader piece around human resources, public safety, and everything else, it's probably not going to work as well as it would to push this off to the Board of Police. So I'm reconsidering my earlier advice, to be honest. But I think that it's a larger conversation I wouldn't mind having with you before you bring your other motion. The police bylaw requires the chief to follow the HR and other policies. And so there is a larger piece in there which this would legitimately tie in with. I just need to think that through. So I think if we leave this for executive now, and then perhaps you and I can have an offline conversation about the rest of it, it actually will align better with the police bylaw and the expectations on the police force vis-a-vis following and falling in as an executive director for administrative purposes under the CAO.
So I'll just take 10 seconds to say, yeah, that's kind of where I'm landing too, is if we approve this now, then part of the staff report coming back can be, this helped, you know, identify some issues that need to be addressed, and here's some ways to do that. Like,
and we may want to look at the police bylaw in terms of better defining where things sit vis-a-vis the Board of Police.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hens.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I was a little confused when I saw this motion, because I thought, you know, what's the executive committee doing with the police commission information, whatever, and human resource matters. And I was also wondering why the RSMP weren't also included as a possible part of this, because I know that the RSMP now have a new educational program that Craig Smith had put together for the diversity, and equity, and inclusion parameters for new officers and stuff. So I was kind of curious how that might get into the report as well, because that's beyond the, I don't know if the RSMP are providing it to the Halifax Police, I don't know, but that's something that could possibly be clarified, so.
Do you want me? So I think for a starting point, I would not amend the motion. We can take a look at it, but the Board of Police serves as an advisory board when it comes to the RCMP. It has a different role, and HRP is a component business unit, if you will, of the municipality, and your bylaw has directed certain things with respect to administration. The RCMP is a contracted service. It's a different kettle of fish when it comes to that. We can explore that, but at the moment, I'd be uncomfortable in giving this kind of direction, as our role with them is entirely different than it is when it comes to our own employees.
Anything else on this? You ready for the question on the motion? Or discussion on it? More discussion? Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So from the conversation and from our CAO's comments, so as the motion is written here, are we comfortable that it goes to the CAO, or is it that it would go to the Board of Police Commissioners? I would just like some clarity on that, please.
CAO.
The CAO is comfortable that it goes to the CAO from the perspective that the municipality has the obligation to ensure all business units are compliant, for example, with the Human Rights Act.
Excellent.
And also, our African Nova Scotian Affairs Office and Diversity and Inclusion Framework are squarely under the municipality's responsibility. And we have a responsibility that's created through bylaw P100 to ensure that HRP is following, all municipal policies and applicable legislation. So I think us receiving the report at the Executive Standing Committee and then making the decision on what pieces, if any, get referred over to the Board of Police Commissioners makes good sense.
So where it says that the staff report is provided to the African Nova Scotia Descent Advisory Committee for review and recommendation, so the report is going to go back to that committee. Okay, great.
Yes, it should go back to that committee. The committee should have the opportunity to discuss it and then make whatever recommendation to the Executive Standing Committee.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think it should go
Councillor Mason?
to you.
Just to, and I see the CEO and lawyer are currently talking, and I see shakes from the clerks and all that, but this is great. This is exactly where the policy wonk, like I know the reporters up there are laughing because I'm obviously enjoying this more than I should, but just to the committee and for the record, emergency management, HR, fire, all already sit here, and I'm bringing a motion because we have no reporting structure right now into any standing committee for the new community safety department that we're standing up. And so if all those things live here, then probably relationship with the RCMP, who's going to review the contract when that happens, and the HRP, and all of the way the HRP exists as a slightly more independent but standalone division of the city. That, like, this is the place that should probably happen. So we're going to have a conversation about that, but that's not for today. But I think we've really flagged something here today. Ask for support. Question on the motion, please.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. I will ask before we go in camera if there are any notices of motion. Notice of motion, Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Funnily enough, take notice of the next regular meeting of the Executive Standing Committee. I propose to move the following: that the Executive Standing Committee requests the CAO provide a staff report regarding the potential adoption of changes to the committee's terms of reference to amend Section 10 to add community safety and broaden the committee's responsibility to include oversight of strategic planning and direction for these business units in line with the other Standing Committee terms of reference.
On the in-camera minutes, Councillor Hensby.
October 23rd, 23?
Seconded by Councillor Mason. All in favor?
Aye.
Those are carried. Just before we go in, our next meeting of this committee will be determined, but it will very likely not be before Christmas. It will be into the new year. Does somebody want to move that we go in camera? Councillor Daigle-Gammon, seconded by Councillor Hensby. All in favor? Aye. We'll go in camera. Councillor Daigle Gammon to ratify our lengthy in-camera discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Move that the Executive Standing Committee, 1, adopt the recommendations as outlined in the private and confidential report dated November 8th, 2023, and 2, direct that the private and confidential report dated November 8th, 2023 be maintained private and confidential.
Second it.
Seconded by Councillor Hensby. Ready for the question? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay, I will look for an adjournment, and we will not have another meeting of this committee prior to the holiday season. Movement to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katie.